The resonance of egoisms. Quote, in place of the old bourgeois society, with its classes and class egoisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. End quote. Quote, in the laboratories of individual creativity, a revolutionary alchemy transmutes the basest metals of everyday life into gold. First and foremost, the problem is to dissolve the consciousness of constraints, that is, the feeling of impotence, in the magnetic exercise of creativity, melt them in the surge of creative power, and the serene affirmation of its genius. Megalomania, sterile on the level of prestige and the spectacle, represents in this context an important stage, the struggle opposing the ego to the coalescence forces of conditioning. Quote, today nihilism reigns triumphant, and it is its night, the spark of creativity, which is the spark of all real life, shines only the more brightly, and while the project of superior organization, of survival, promotes abortive, there is, as these sparks become more frequent and gradually dissolve into a single light, the promise of a new organization, based this time on harmony of individual wills. Historic becoming has taken us to the crossing point, where radical subjectivity is confronted with the possibility of transforming the world. This privileged moment is the reversal of perspective. End quote. Communist society is conceivable only on the foundations of the resonance of egoisms. Thus, its basis is the cohesion of egoisms. Whereas, therefore, egoism has appeared as the force of separation and privatization par excellence. Par excellence. The essence of renaissance of egoisms is this: the other person is a part of your wealth. The resonance of egoism is the unity, the synthesis, the singularity of, quote, particular, end quote, and the, quote, general interest, communist society. The cohesion of communist society, once the threshold of its conditions proper has been reached, is conceivable on this basis, that the community society association itself is the greatest personal value that the social individual must possess, that is, their social relationships are this greatest value and this greatest wealth. The social relation itself becomes the unitary, unified, and universal means to the attainment of every end, to the gratification of every need, and thus also at end in itself. Society holds together to the extent that the social individual find a greater value in this production than in any act that would destroy it. Communist society. Quote, in place of the wealth and poverty of political economy, we have the wealthy man, and the plenitude of human need. The wealthy man is, at the same time, the one who needs a complex of human manifestations of life, and whose own self-realization extends as an inner necessity and need, not only the wealth, but also the property of man acquires. In a socialist perspective, a human, and thus a social meaning, poverty is a passive bond which leads man to experience a need for the greatest wealth, the other person, the sway of the objective entity within me, the sensuous eruption of life activity, is the passion which here becomes activity of my being. End quote. Quote, authentic common life arises not through reflection, rather it comes about from the need of egoisms, of individuals, that is, immediately from activation of their very existence. Is it not up to man whether this common life exists or not, whether not, so long as man does not recognize himself as man and does not organize the world humanly, this common life appears in the form of alienation, because its subject, man, is being alienated from itself. End quote. We anticipate a profound reversal of perspective at the threshold of communal society, in which any possible strictly privatized value will pale into insignificance, and be experienced as narrow and impoverished, in comparison to the individual, personal, quote, private, quote, value to each social individual and his social existence, and this attitude would be then, under those conditions, no mere idealistic posture or pious wish, no mere moral abstraction, no representation over and over the real conditions, which is all it can ever be today, but on the contrary, would arise from the most immediate, palpable, and concrete facts of life, increasingly up to the present, Since the breakup of early communal forms, all wealth has been private. That is, only private property has been recognized as wealth. In the future, if there is a future, the narrow and the privatized will be revealed as the essence of poverty. The wealth will be realized as social wealth, as wealth in human beings and their relations and their capacities and their faculties and their objectifications. That is, the greatest wealth and the necessary content of all wealth is society itself. The central problem of communist social relations is the following: what it is to be the basis of human relationships, of the interpersonal cohesion, beyond kinship and exchange value, that is, beyond the blood relations which form the incredible binding force, the great weakness of primitive communist societies, and the exchange value relations into which these increasingly dissolved in the formation of class societies. The solution can only be of the form of real affinity, practically, sensuously, discovered and verified, practically supersede and dissolve free association, the resonance of passions. But within the statement of the solution, everything still remains to be said. Let's get one thing straight right now. All this talk of historically necessity and inevitability only succeeds in making the mystic necessity a pseudo-subject, and of decoying attention from the real subjects, ourselves. Communist society is, quote, historically determined and, quote, objectively determined, to be proud only to the extent that we are subjectively, quote, bound and determined, quote, end quote, to produce it. And this does not deny at all such a subjectivity has its necessary objective conditions that can only develop historically. Radical subjectivity. What is this radical subjectivity? From now on, the revolutionary subject is the conscious, a positively self-conscious egoist, as opposed to the unconscious or negatively self-conscious (guilty) egoist, among whom the revolutionary walks unrecognized but recognizes them. He can sustain this positive attitude towards his expanded egoism and its first sign in others by virtue of his comprehension of its positive social outcome in a society. Separated from this one by the socio-psychotherapeutic process of revolution, in which the egoism of each is the first condition for the fulfillment of the egoism of all. Contrary to the ideological banality, it is only the most greedy people who can never be, quote, bought off, end quote. What we have called, quote, communist egoism, end quote, is essentially the same as what Van Giem and his situationists have named, quote, radical subjectivity in all their writings. It is there in spirit, if not ever fully in letter. In their failure to develop this concept in all its ramifications and to cohere their whole practice with it, the remnants of moralistic and secular Christianism, which therein still remained, we locate the very root of their failure. Radical subjectivity, that is, communist egoism, or the realized, quote, social individual, is the concrete universal, which is emergent in our time. It is popular, which is potentially everywhere. Radical subjectivity is our very root, the root of which we all have in common, the real basis of community. Root subjectivity, the primitive human root, can only be divulged as such at the far end of prehistory, as the outcome of process of that prehistory itself, and as the secret basis of supersession. Quote, I am nothing, but I must be everything. End quote. With this monstrous decrepitude of contemporary, quote, society, end quote, the nihilist, its commonplace product, knows only the first half of the statement, I am nothing. Therefore, anything else can be only less than nothing to me. In the upside-down world of alienation, it is the totality of things, of commodities, of money, of capital, that is everything. And we, the workers who make it, are shit. The nihilist is like a syllogism, suspended at the minor premises. An acrobat who somersaults is broken in mid-flight. For him, the logic of this empirical truth, this truth of experience of daily life, does not immediately tumble over into its opposite, its necessary conclusion, I am nothing, but I must be everything, the conclusion that would make a revolutionary of him. He produces commodities, money, capital. We produce everything that makes up social wealth. We must become explicitly what we are already are implicitly everything. This becoming visible, this becoming true of social truth expresses the total process of communist revolution. That's it.